It's a pleasure to be here, to give the last input of today, and it's also a challenge after all these wonderful inputs. And as you know by now, I'm a trained physicist and philosopher. I'm not a designer, as you can see from my slides. And I also thought about apologizing, but then actually René reminded me of the fact, no, I shouldn't do that, because actually that makes you feel quite good, because you will now realize that we still need designers. So, okay. So I leave it at that with the meta comments about my slides, but I thought it's good to have them so that you can follow what I'm talking about, and gives you kind of an idea, some of the keywords. So what I would like to do now for the next 20 minutes is to talk about what I take the term critical thinking to be, and we will see that there's a lot of going on here in terms of topics, in terms of content, what we heard already today. So I think it fits in very nicely. And then also the question why we should practice it. And of course, we also together with colleagues from different areas actually. So this is, for example, an editorial paper in a chemistry journal. So I practiced that for quite a while now in academia with people from very different disciplines. And so what are the main messages? So what I think what critical thinking is, why it is important, is that, you know, it kind of saves you or helps you against perplexity and mania. What do I mean by that? So if as a student or as a researcher you are confronted with a new situation, right? You don't know how to deal with that, then you shouldn't be too naively over enthusiastic on the one hand, but on the other hand, you also should not just stop doing anything. So it's about that, and I think that also connects quite nicely to the topic of resilience in a sense. And so the idea is to have a kind of a toolbox for responsiveness in various contexts, and I will come to that. And then the other half of my talk, or the main part actually of these 20 minutes, is about actual examples. So how can we practice and teach critical thinking in a university context, or maybe also for your research group, right? And the important point here is also something we heard already a couple of times today. It's about actual experience, right? It's about living it, and it's about enhancing the student's responsibility. And I will briefly tell you about 3 examples. I will only sketch what we did there in this courses, and then we have enough time during the workshop to go into details, right? So when you are interested in, how did you exactly do that, we can do that during the workshop, and I mean, it's then your turn, and again, the point is living it. Okay, so let's start with a quick reflection on what critical thinking might be. So I mean, quite a lot comes to mind. So if you put in critical thinking in Google, you find these kind of pictures, which of course for a philosopher are very stressful. Okay. Then, I mean, if I give a talk on critical thinking, often something like that. So there are a lot of light bulbs coming up all the time. And also here, critical thinking, problem, thinking, solution, and again, the light bulb. And this is, I think, the kind of the standard claim I often hear also in the university context, right? Okay, so I mean, critical thinking is trivial because it's something we are doing all the time, and it just means problem solving. And I would say yes, sometimes might be the case, but definitely not always, and not for all disciplines and contexts. And so, for example, I mean, think about my disciplines. I mean, philosophy. And within physics, I was trained as a theoretical physicist. It's really very rarely about problem solving in a general way. So, I mean, it's different, especially in a certain engineering context, but you rarely do problem solving. So it must be something else. And I don't want to give a full definition, but I just want to hint you at some properties of what I think is important here. And let's roughly say, okay, so critical here means something as opposed to dogmatic. So it's about not just adhering to what you've learned, to your fixed set of whatever it might be, certain methods, certain concepts, a certain exemplar your whole discipline lives on, these kind of things, right? And of course, we all know that's not so easy because there are numerous constraints, funding, time limits, and so on. So here the cartoon says, you're completely free to carry out whatever research you want, so long as you come to these conclusions, right? So, of course, I'm not saying that it's an easy task, but that's what it should be about. And then it's an ability to view things from different perspectives and from different angles. I mean, to use a visual metaphor, to get a certain kind of visual depth to it. If you look at things from different angles, you get kind of a 3D impression. And this is, of course, not so easy because of disciplinary silos, right? We live in our disciplinary silos and several subtleties, especially regarding language. So those of us who did interdisciplinary projects know that it's not so easy to talk to people from other disciplines, and that it's really takes some time because they speak differently. They have a different way of talking about things. But, I mean, this subtleties about language, it's even more complicated in the sense that also the way you talk within your disciplines has severe effects on how you go about, well, whatever, solving your problems or thinking. Maybe a good example is if you think about in the biomedical context, if you think about drug design or something, the talk there and also in cancer research, it's a lot of warfare metaphors, right? We have, you know, it's the drug target, and then we have the T killer cells, and then, you know, the white blood bodies are like the policemen, and so on. We have this whole warfare talk, and of course it shapes what you are doing. And if you start talking differently, if you start talking about, let's say, the milieu, the cells are living in, and you want to change the milieu, then it's much more of a social metaphor, and it changes what you are doing, right? So this is really an important issue, and to make people aware of that. So, and then, and this is really difficult even for the academic context and for the students to accept, it's not so much about being right or being wrong or providing the correct answers. Instead, and also this came up already, it's kind of an ability and a power. So it's kind of a critical awareness. It's what I don't mean by critical thinking always question everything, right? I mean, why? So that would be skepticism, or you might also call it institutionalized nitpicking, always but why? So we don't want that, but we also don't want the opposite, which at least in the physics context would be something like shut up and calculate. So we want something in between. Okay, so that was a negative characterization. What's a positive one? So the flip side is really to be able to justify, also to explain the terminology you are using. Why is the research question you are asking, why is that an important question? Why do you use this experimental setup, for example? These kind of questions. Yeah, what it is that why is it that my research is important? What are the goals, the limits, and the dangers? Okay, so take responsibility for your actions, you must. And I think he says something very important here, namely by using the term responsibility. So if we want kind of a rough definition or equation here, so then critical thinking is about being responsible, being able to respond in the most elementary sense already, yeah? The ability to step back, to answer queries in a reliable and appropriate fashion, and that's often then for students or for designers to come or philosophers to come, it's important to learn that ability on different levels, right? Different stakeholders, if you like, or people inside, outside your institute, your department, in and outside academia. And just as a side remark, there's really something to responsibility and responsibility. Just think also of the German terminology. It's Verantwortung, right? So the responsiveness is in there. So that's really important. So So what does it mean in practice when you explain something? I often say, well, it's about navigating the Bermuda Triangle of triviality, falsehood, and incomprehensibleness. So this is then often the trick, right? If I would now start talking about elementary particle physics and about quantum chromodynamics and the color charge of quarks or something, I would easily become incomprehensible. Yeah, if I want to make it easier to understand, I might easily say something wrong, say like something, oh, you know, these are just like small balls or something, right? Or I say just something trivial, right? To be safe, I might just say something like, you know, the world around us actually is constituted by somehow smaller ingredients, right? So that would be not very interesting. So that's really an issue here. Okay, so now we move on to the education, to the students. So why would you train that? Why would you train people to build up this capacity? Well, I mean, one thing is that we want our students to be or to become responsible, and maybe that's a good way to start. And students should also be prepared for a certain type of contingencies that will turn up in their daily life later, because then they are working in a field where new things will come up, and it's not that you have a textbook already made for you. So in this sense, it's about toolbox, and it's actually fun, as hopefully the following examples will show. Okay, so, but then the first general question is, I mean, how do I do that? I mean, as I said, okay, so critical thinking, supposed to being dogmatic. So, I mean, how to teach not to be dogmatic? I mean, not surely not by claiming that, saying that dogmatism is bad and that is your main dogma. So, I think what's important, and again, that links to a lot of things we heard already, is the experiential side of it. So the examples I will show, they have a lot to do with interactivity. So because it's an ability, right? So students have to do something. Often to trigger something in the beginning, we had the term curiosity coming up several times today. So maybe start with a kind of a disturbing moment. And of course, whenever possible, apply whatever you are doing to work the students have done themselves. And I will give you an example of that. So I've developed several courses. I will briefly talk about 3 to give you some ideas about what can be done, right? Of course, there's much more that can be done, but maybe to give you some ideas about what might be interesting. So the first example is a course called Scientific Concepts and Methods. We developed at ETH, and actually that's interesting. That's the only course I'm presenting which actually made it to be a compulsory course. So everyone who studies pharmaceutical sciences as a master's degree at ETH has to take this course. Right? If you would have asked me a couple of years ago which discipline would be the first, I would never put any money on the pharmacists, but well, that's the way it goes. So what we do there is we're asking questions. We consider topics which are important for the people from pharmaceutical science. So, for example, what's the role of images within your discipline? The role of numbers, of quantification. Yeah, do we want to quantize life? Things like that. And the format then is that I give an input from a philosophical, from a kind of a conceptual perspective, and then we always have colleagues from various other disciplines which then talk about the actual methods involved. So when we talk about the mathematization, we have a guy from bioinformatics. When we talk about the role of images, we have one who's using imaging techniques, and then we have an interdisciplinary discussion. So after these 2 inputs, I mean, having 2 inputs, that's still kind of normal, but then we have a discussion with the students where both the scientist and the philosopher is there, and the students, I mean, they prepare their questions in small groups, but the constraint is they are supposed to ask questions which both of the presenters can answer, right? So to avoid technical questions about imaging techniques or to avoid technical questions about philosophy, but something about the role then, say, of images that applies to both. And that actually works quite well. And just to give you an idea, so on Monday, so the first day, this is a block seminar, we start with the question, what is science? And this is kind of the disturbing moment. Since these are people from pharmaceutical sciences, it's typically the case that the criterion they come up with, okay, is empirical. It must be empirical, otherwise it's not a science, right? And so usually my first question back to them is then, okay, so we shut down the mathematics department at ETH then, right? I think their first impulse is to say yes, but then they think, maybe not. And then, I mean, we can then really go to the whole list, the things they come up with. And of course, there are always sciences who fit under that criterion, but there are always sciences who don't fit. And by the end of the day, they realize, okay, so there is no one, the philosophers would say, no, sufficient and necessary criterion to say, okay, so if that criterion applies, then it's science, and otherwise it's not. So that doesn't work, and that's really yeah, not such an easy message to take. And then what we do is talking about the application of this critical thinking to students' own work. So the students in this course, they have done some project work beforehand. That means they have done their small series of experiments or something. And then whatever we discuss in the morning, the topics, they then apply it to their own project work. So then they have to think, okay, so what role did images actually play in my case? And oh, what about the mathematization? Did I quantize life? So what did I do here? And so it's about taking responsibility, answering these questions in relation to your own project work. And it's really difficult for them that there are no prefigured answers, right? So sometimes they come up saying things like, well, you know, with this question, I mean, if I understand it this way, then in that regard, okay, images played an important role in my topic. But, you know, if I put it that way, then actually not so much. So which one is the right answer? What shall I write down? And then I say, no, you just gave the perfect answer. Please write down both. Right? That's exactly why we start thinking about things. Moving to an example which is closer to design. So sorry for the abbreviation here. So that means philosophical reflections on digital methods in architecture. So that was a course I prepared together with a colleague from architecture, and we really wanted to do something together. And I should emphasize that we started that in 2016, so that was before COVID. So was a bit more innovative then than it might seem now. But there the issue was, okay, we want to have a course for architects and philosophers because I think there are important topics which relate to both discipline, like the notion of process also. But you know, philosophers, they write texts, and architects, I mean, they do an Entwurf, yeah, they draft something. And how do we get those things together? And also we thought that for us it was interesting how, let's say, how knowledge works. So I mean, philosophers writing text, you have an argument, a written argument, and usually in philosophy we say, well, but a picture can never be an argument. But you know, but a picture or a draft can play surely a certain important role in the context of gaining knowledge. So we thought, okay, so we should also reflect and experience this knowledge generation process. And then the other issue was using tools from our institution at that point. I mean, all these teaching tools, I mean, you know that like Moodle or something, they all have a very linear structure, right? And with this linear structure, you are basically back in this text domain, one thing after the other. Okay, so we thought, well, we want to have everyone on the same page, and maybe we can have everyone and everything on the same digital page. And so we developed a a whiteboard for this course where everything was put onto. So whether it was assignments, minutes of the last meetings, reviews, and actually, and since working together with an architect, he always wanted to also to have a product. So there was a fancy way of getting PDFs from that stuff. And I mean, using a whiteboard, we then had two dimensions. And so what happened? I mean, you just get an idea of. I mean, there are a lot of pictures involved here, text boxes. I can tell you later on more about the details about the exact assignments and what we did. But that was really interesting. So how as I said, how the pictures worked in this kind of argumentative context, and also reflecting and experiencing knowledge generation. I mean, it's a bit like what we did this morning with the cards. But here, throughout the semester, you could really see literally how arguments were kind of put aside, right? You could really see that. Then there were certain paths that developed, that grew quite fast. Others didn't develop at all, or as I said, things were pushed aside. So that was really interesting, and also to reflect on that. And again, we also wrote a paper on that, and can give you, of course, the reference for that. And the last example is a course I did with physicists, philosophical reflections on physics. And what we did there is we had staged debates. So we were also thinking, okay, what are important contexts? Okay, so what's the role of experiments? What's the role of language, of metaphors? And then the three of us, the three lecturers, beforehand, we sat together and we really tried to make up three very different positions, which are in a sense thought-provoking, but which cover a lot of ground, a lot of things you might think about, let's say, experiments. And that was really fun, because we then had the stage debate. So each one of us had his position he had to defend. And so what was really difficult for the students, I mean, we always told them, well, it's not our own positions. We make up these positions, and if for the whole semester you always find my position the most convincing one, then you are rather schizophrenic in a certain sense, because it won't fit throughout the semester. And this was really difficult for the students, and so we had them. So then we had our discussions. We had them vote and defend certain positions, and so we worked with breakout groups. And again, I can tell you the details later. So how did we do that? Were the student assistants from either from physics or from philosophy? So how did that work? All these kind of things. But the idea there was, okay, so the students within the breakout groups, then they have to take responsibility, and we increased, so to speak, the difficulty in the first sessions. They should say which position they find most convincing, and then within the groups defended their positions. Later on, we asked them, okay, so which position did you like most? And then we actually swapped teams. Okay, so you think position 1 is the most plausible one, you will now defend position number 3. And we did these kind of things there. Okay, so these are my examples. Just to sum up, so what I mean by critical thinking here is not a body of dead and nitpicky textbook knowledge, but a way of engaging with the world around us. It has an intrinsic value, namely to become or be a responsible researcher. But of course, you also have an instrumental value to it. You gain a toolbox. I mean, by discussing all these things, and usually we then come up also with historical examples. So what happened in such cases usually. So the idea is, I mean, you don't have a ready-to-hand one-to-one solution for the next problem that will show up tomorrow. You usually don't have that. But it's about being flexible and systematic in one's thinking, and less surprised when encountering something unexpected. And that's it. And I just put some advertisements up there. And first of all, thank you for your attention. And now what I would like to do in terms of a workshop now is, actually, I mean, it's now your turn, and you will get now ready to hand solutions from my side. Because that would be a category mistake now. I think what might be nice, also because it's the end of the day, that we now have quite open discussions within small groups, and I will just suggest some topics that might be of interest. So, I think what I really would like you to do is now to do the transition or the transformation to your own context, right? So, what does it mean for your context? If you are teaching, which of the teaching elements do you think would fit nicely? Which element would you think now that doesn't fit? Or also for your research context. You might also think or discuss about some of the terms or elements I was talking about, like responsibility, like disturbing something, the idea of going beyond the linear and experience. And my idea would be that, we have about nearly an hour now, that again, you would form small groups, go to those 4 tables, because then again, I think it's like 8 people. I think that should work nicely for a group discussion. And then what I would do is, I would go in, let's say, an interval of about 5 minutes through these groups, and then again, loop up. Either listen to your discussions, be happy to answer questions, to discuss with you, even if it's on the technical level, right? If you think, oh, I have this kind of seminar, but how did you solve that problem there with the, I mean, even these technical things, that how do you do the breakout groups, and so I'm happy to discuss these things with you. And so, yeah, I invite you to form groups, maybe with someone you always wanted to talk to but haven't yet, and then go to these 4 tables. And thank you very much.